Up front on the Voice of America, my name is Jackson Vunganyi. We are coming to you from Studio 4 here in Washington, D.C. For those of you who have been following African politics, you know that Liberia has just had a transition, peaceful transition of power from Johnson Sirleaf, President Johnson Sirleaf, who handed over power to George Weah, President George Weah, in January this year, I believe, after he won in a peaceful election, something that we are starting to see more often on the African continent that we are so happy and proud of. And in the studio with me is Laraamand Nyonton, a young Liberian leader. Laraamand, did you run in the last election as a member of parliament?
Sure. And I hope we'll have the time to go into that. But right. I want to say thank you so much. I consider this a debut, and it's a hats up to all of the young, enterprising African leaders, both here in the diaspora and across the continent, that have made a debut too as well. I have been a religious follower of the show, as a matter of fact. So dating back when I was in Liberia 2-3 years back.
I have to give a special shout out to our followers in Liberia. It is one of the countries where I go and people recognize me instantly. I was very, very surprised on the street. So we have a lot of followers, and shout out to you. And you know, next time I'll be there very soon. So you know, well, I have your man Laraamand right here.
Obviously, we're gonna go back and and complete some of the work we left.
So Laraamand, your country just went through a peaceful power transition. George Weah is the new president. He has his hands full, obviously, having come from, you have had a difficult history, the Civil War, you had Ebola epidemic a couple of years ago. The country's still in recovery mode in many ways. What do you think should be his main priorities right now as he starts his term in office?
There are a lot of urgency considering where George Weah is starting from, President Weah. And I always like to compare the two. At the time when Johnson Sirleaf took office, we still had the same level of urgency in terms of national priorities. I think the only difference is stability. So President Johnson Sirleaf has been able to, as much as she could with the help of the international community, stabilize Liberia. And this is where Weah has at least a first step moving forward. But I would just like to backtrack a little. The election of 2017 was an amazing one. It was not just about change, I think more like what we saw in December of 2017 was a referendum on governance. And to a larger extent, if you went to Liberia, to the Jackson, you realize that there has been a considerable generational shift in the governance paradigm. A lot of those who have been appointed to key positions of public trust so as far as the new government is concerned, about 80% of them are young people. So you find young people taking over in all dimensions in public life, whether it is from municipality governance, that if you went to the Monrovia City Corporation, an institution that manages the city affairs and city management, a young man is heading that institution, up to the point where we have to talk about expanding the private sector in terms of business regulations and all of that. Our young man currently heads the Liberia Business Registry. To our fiscal management, young people have been able to capture the Ministry of Youth and Sports, as assistant ministers, deputy ministers, working alongside the ministry. So
in terms of appointing young leadership, George Weah decided to go with a more youthful, to tap into that young generation of leaders.
Yeah, I think young people are having a revolution on governance, and that is an unprecedented pattern. As we've seen, Johnson Sirleaf, the former president, did that, but to a little extent, maybe around 5 to 10% in terms of young people occupying the democratic and governance space of Liberia. If we have to historicize as well, you realize that looking back in the 70s, we did not see that. Young people were only good enough within the light of the public space to be messengers within government ministries. In the 80s, when President Doe took over, Master Sergeant Samuel Doe, who had the first coup d'etat in Liberia, you realize that young people were massively recruited to join the military. In the 90s, we all know the beginning of the civil conflict and the 14 years that followed. Young people were recruited as child soldiers to perform and perpetrate violence and mayhem. And from the 2000 upward, you realize that young people are good enough to be sent back to the classrooms, all right, acquiring skills and degree that the economy, in fact, was not asking for. So you had a whole bunch of us graduating with a degree in accounting and management and economics. With our jobs, where year after year, unemployment number kept rising. So we are proud that at this point in our national sojourn that the new president is not just igniting change, but ensuring that young people make a critical mass of the mainstream policy-making decision processes of Liberia.
And hopefully that they will start making policy that reflects on their aspirations, and try to move Liberia forward in terms of creating more jobs, job opportunities for young people. Let's talk a little bit about the health sector, which is something that has been in the news or was in the news a couple of years ago. But recent, we know that one of the worst health epidemics on the continent that hit the three West African countries of Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, and killed thousands of people in Liberia. What would you advise George Weah, President Weah, in terms of strengthening the mechanisms of response to any type of future epidemics of that kind?
Well, like I said, there are a lot of urgency beyond the health sector. There are other urgency, and we'll look into that. But basically, I think one of the things that we can do to strengthen the healthcare delivery system in Liberia is to ensure that we reflect that within the budget line. If we can increase our overall national spending on health and ensure that as low as nurses and doctors that are on the front line get decent salary and wages as compared to policymakers that are at the top, I think we are beginning the process of motivating those who actually, and you were in Liberia during the Ebola situation.
Right.
Ordinary people who talk to the communities to help out. We're not the bishop in sitting in office and making the policy. Okay, they sign the check, but those who are actually risking their lives
responders
with ordinary Liberians.
Right.
So we have to transition to looking at ways that we can fix actually the salary disparity that exists currently within the health sector. Increase our overall national spending on health, ensure that we have more referral hospitals, create a kind of mobile healthcare system that benefit the people from rural communities as well, especially in deserted towns and villages. That could be the beginning of seeing how we can address in the short term as well as in the long term for health. But there are other concerns too. If we truly have to open up the economy, President Weah in his inaugural speech said that Liberia is open for investment, and that is true. But we have to change our economic mindset of dependence on the extractive industry as the only source of generating revenue, of also dependence on international foreign aid, okay, as the only means through which our budgetary lines can be popped up. We have to look at other ways that we can expand the revenue envelope. And I think one of the ways to do that is for the government to start beginning to think about itself as a corporation, to enterprise itself. China did that some 40 years ago. Japan did that also, during the same period, and see where China is right now in terms of how you can utilize both your population and the means of production to ensure that your economy is expanding, but also the people are the key drivers of the economy. If you look at the Liberian economy today in terms of composition, you have Lebanese investors, you have Nigerian investors, you have Americans investors. You don't have Liberians competing within the business free market, right? So what the government can do is to prioritize Liberian-owned businesses, enterprise itself, and invest more in competition, give Liberian businesses a leeway. We can also try to expand the free market opportunity to investing in infrastructure, and it's very key because as much as Liberia is ready for business, the more business multinational enter the country, you realize that the overhaul, the operational cost is really high. So we have to
build
fix,
roads.
Yeah,
for example,
build roads, get electricity going.
Right.
For example, we have to invest in our hydro plant. For as it stands today, only 20% of the country is electrified, and that's a shame. You know, after 170 years of existence. So we have to look at all alternative sources of energy. Work with the World Bank. As I understand, they're currently doing a project in one of the counties, Lofa County, utilizing alternative sources of energy to ensure that they got something called the geothermal. It's where when you go to Liberia, because of our tropical weather, and you dig the ground today, you see heat coming from under the ground, right? That heat is used to produce electricity.
Right, that's the geothermal electricity.
Yeah,
right.
And that is the test case that the World Bank is currently utilizing in Lofa County to supply 50,000 homes. We can replicate that kind of project
and expand
for rural villages,
and also tap it into the other grid.
Yeah.